Naples, January 1944, the city had just fallen to Allied forces. Months of brutal urban fighting had left it broken, its streets crowded with displaced civilians, its infrastructure shattered, its sewers collapsed. And now something else was spreading through Naples, something that had historically killed more soldiers than any weapon ever forged. Within weeks, over 1 million people in and around the city were at risk. German intelligence watched. Their medical officers waited. Because they had seen this before, in Russia, in the Balkans, in every major conflict for the last 4 centuries, they knew what came next except. It didn't come. American troops were not falling ill, not at scale, not in the numbers history and biology said they should. German doctors couldn't explain it. This is the story of why. To understand what happened in Naples in 1944, you need to understand what typhus actually is, and what it had done to armies throughout history. Epidemic typhus is caused by a bacterium called Rickettsia prausea. It doesn't travel through the air. It doesn't spread through water. It travels in the bodies of lice, specifically the human body louse, tiny, nearly invisible parasites that thrive in the conditions of war, unwashed clothing, overcrowded trenches, men sleeping pressed together for warmth, refugee camps, bombed cities. Every condition that war creates is a condition that lice love. When an infected louse feeds on a human host, it defecates on the skin. The person scratches. The bacteria enter the bloodstream. Within days, the victim develops a high fever, crushing headaches, and a characteristic rash that spreads across the torso. Without treatment, mortality rates range from 10 to 60%. Even survivors are often left weakened for months. History's ledger is staggering. During the 30 Years' War in the 17th century, typhus killed more soldiers than combat. During Napoleon's catastrophic Russian campaign of 1812, historians estimate that typhus, not Russian resistance, destroyed the Grande Armée. Of the roughly 600,000 men Napoleon marched into Russia, fewer than 100,000 returned. Many historians believe typhus claimed more of them than battle or frostbite. In World War I, typhus erupted across the Eastern Front and tore through the Balkans with particular ferocity. In Serbia alone, between 1914 and 1915, an estimated 150,000 soldiers and civilians died from the disease in a single outbreak. The Serbian army lost more men to typhus in those months than to Austro-Hungarian bullets. By the time World War II began, military planners on all sides understood the threat. Typhus had broken out in German-occupied Eastern Europe in horrifying fashion. Soviet forces suffered widespread outbreaks on the Eastern Front. Even British and Commonwealth troops in North Africa had faced serious louse-borne disease threats in the desert campaigns. The strategic calculus was simple and frightening. Any large Allied force moving through the bombed, broken, louse-infested cities of southern Europe faced a serious typhus threat. The campaign in Italy, up through Naples, toward Rome, would take place in exactly those conditions. American military planners knew this, and they were not going to let history repeat itself. In December 1942, a full year before American boots touched Italian soil, the United States Army established a dedicated unit whose sole purpose was to make sure typhus never got the chance to repeat history. They called it the Typhus Commission. Officially, the Army Typhus Commission. And it was, by any measure, one of the most serious scientific mobilizations in the history of military medicine. The commission brought together some of the best epidemiologists, physicians, and public health researchers in America. Their mandate was not just to treat typhus if it appeared. Their mandate was to prevent it entirely, to understand every vector, every transmission route, every vulnerability, and to close each one before the first soldier stepped ashore. This was a new way of thinking about military medicine. Historically, armies treated disease reactively. Soldiers got sick, doctors responded. The Typhus Commission was built on a different philosophy: prevention, prediction, preemptive action. They began by studying every known typhus outbreak in recorded military history. They analyzed the Serbian disaster of 1914. They mapped Napoleon's losses. They examined typhus outbreaks from the Crimean War, from World War I, from the ongoing Eastern Front. The pattern was always the same: lice, body lice carrying Rickettsia prausea. Eliminate the lice, and you eliminate the disease. The question was how. At the same time the Commission was forming its strategy, another battle was being fought, not in a military headquarters, but in a laboratory. Since the 1930s, researchers had been working on a typhus vaccine. The challenge was immense. Unlike smallpox or yellow fever, typhus was difficult to cultivate reliably. The bacterium required living cells to grow. It couldn't simply be brewed in a flask. Early vaccines were difficult to produce at scale, inconsistent in quality, and sometimes caused dangerous reactions. But wartime changes everything. Driven by military urgency and virtually unlimited funding, American scientists, building on pioneering work by Polish and French researchers who had developed earlier vaccine strains, dramatically accelerated production techniques. By 1943, the U.S. Army had an effective typhus vaccine that could be produced in the millions of doses needed to vaccinate an entire army. Every American soldier deploying to the Mediterranean theater received the typhus vaccine before embarkation. This was not a small logistical achievement. Vaccinating hundreds of thousands of men required coordination between pharmaceutical companies, military supply chains, and medical officers at every level of the chain of command. It required refrigeration in a theater of operations where refrigeration was not guaranteed. It required the kind of systematic administrative follow-through that military bureaucracies don't always do well. But they did it. The vaccine wasn't perfect. No vaccine ever is. It didn't provide absolute immunity, but it dramatically reduced the severity of infection in those who were exposed, and it reduced mortality to near zero in vaccinated populations even when infection occurred. It was the first layer of the shield. But the Typhus Commission knew a vaccine alone wasn't enough. The vaccine protected individuals after exposure. What they needed was a way to kill the lice before they ever reached the soldiers. They needed a weapon that could be deployed at scale, in field conditions, with minimal equipment, against a near-invisible enemy measuring millimeters in length. They found it in a chemical that had been synthesized in a Swiss laboratory in 1874, largely forgotten for decades, and rediscovered in 1939 by a chemist named Paul Hermann Müller. DDT, dichlorodiphenyltrichloroethane. Müller had been testing the compound as an agricultural insecticide when he noticed something remarkable. It killed insects on surfaces that had been sprayed days or even weeks before. The chemical didn't just kill insects on contact, it had a residual effect. It stayed active, it kept killing. Müller's discovery would eventually earn him the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1948. But in 1943, what mattered to American military planners wasn't its agricultural applications. What mattered was this: DDT killed lice, efficiently, cheaply, at scale, and it was safe enough to dust directly onto human skin and clothing. The U.S. military moved immediately. DDT was produced in vast quantities. Compact, handheld dusting devices, essentially small bellows, were manufactured by the millions. Delousing stations were established at ports of entry, transit camps, and forward staging areas. Soldiers were dusted. Refugees were dusted. Civilians in occupied cities were dusted. The protocol was almost shockingly simple. A soldier or civilian would step into a delousing station. A medical corpsman would insert the nozzle of the DDT duster into their collar, their waistband, their sleeves, and pump. Within seconds, the person was coated with a fine white powder, invisible, essentially odorless, and lethal to any louse that tried to establish residence. It took under a minute per person, and it worked. Which brings us back to Naples, January 1944. When American forces entered the city, they found conditions that by every historical precedent should have triggered a catastrophic typhus outbreak. Naples had been under bombardment. Its infrastructure was destroyed. Its population was malnourished, crowded, and heavily louse-infested. German forces had sabotaged the city's water supply before withdrawing. Typhus cases were already appearing among civilians. In the First World War, this scenario had played out identically across the Balkans and Eastern Europe. Disease had won every time. But the Typhus Commission was ready. Within days of the city's capture, a massive public health operation launched, one of the largest and most rapid delousing campaigns in history. Medical teams fanned out through Naples. Delousing stations were set up at churches, schools, and city squares. Italian civilians, by the hundreds of thousands, were processed through DDT dusting. Teams moved through overcrowded apartment buildings, dusting bedding, clothing, furniture. The numbers are staggering. Over the course of the Naples campaign, approximately 1.3 million people were treated with DDT. Fred Soper, an American public health officer who had previously contained yellow fever outbreaks in Brazil and was now attached to the Allied forces, coordinated much of the civilian delousing operation. Soper was a relentless, almost obsessive administrator. He had learned in South America that disease control required absolute thoroughness. Partial measures produced partial results. You had to be systematic. You had to cover everyone. By March 1944, just weeks after the campaign began, the typhus outbreak that had been building in Naples was stopped cold. It was the first time in recorded history that a winter typhus epidemic had been halted after it had already started. German medical officers, reviewing reports from their intelligence services, struggled to account for what they were seeing. Their counterpart forces in the east were still suffering serious typhus casualties. Their own occupation forces in other theaters had faced outbreaks. The conditions in Naples should, by every biological and historical logic, have produced mass casualties among the Allied troops. They didn't. Naples was not an isolated success. Across the Mediterranean and Pacific theaters, the combination of mass vaccination, DDT delousing, and the systematic protocols developed by the Typhus Commission kept typhus mortality among American forces at levels that would have seemed miraculous to any military planner from any previous era. In Italy, as Allied forces pushed northward through some of the most difficult terrain in Europe, through the mud of Monte Cassino, through the ancient hill towns of the Apennines, typhus remained contained. In the Pacific, where a different array of tropical diseases threatened American forces, DDT was deployed with equal effect against malaria-carrying mosquitoes. The chemical had become something close to a universal tool, a compound that could be turned against nearly any vector-borne disease threat. But it was in Europe that the stakes were clearest. As Allied forces crossed into Germany in 1945, they began liberating concentration camps where typhus had been raging among the prisoners. At Bergen-Belsen, where tens of thousands of prisoners had died in the final months of the war, liberating forces faced an immediate typhus emergency. American DDT stocks were rushed to the camps. Delousing operations began immediately. Medical teams worked around the clock in conditions of almost indescribable horror. They stopped the outbreaks. It's worth pausing for a moment to consider what typhus did to armies that didn't have these tools. On the Eastern Front, where conditions were the most extreme and sanitation the most difficult to maintain, typhus ravaged populations on both sides throughout the war. Soviet forces suffered serious outbreaks in 1941 and 1942. German forces in the East, stretched across thousands of miles of front, fighting in conditions of extreme cold and supply shortage, faced recurring louse-borne disease threats that consumed medical resources and degraded combat effectiveness. The Wehrmacht had typhus vaccine programs of their own. They were not completely unprepared, but they did not have DDT at the scale Americans deployed it. They did not have the systematic, institutionalized delousing infrastructure that the Typhus Commission had built. And they did not have the combination of vaccine plus DDT plus systematic delousing that created the layered protection American forces enjoyed. German field doctors could see the outcome clearly. What they could not always see until after the war was the mechanism. The sheer industrial scale of American chemical production was, in many ways, as decisive in this invisible war as it was in the visible one. The numbers tell a clear story. In World War I, American forces still recorded thousands of typhus cases. In World War II, the U.S. Army recorded fewer than 100 cases of epidemic typhus among its entire force of over 16 million men and women. Of those cases, virtually none were fatal. For context, in the same period, typhus killed an estimated 3 million people in the Soviet Union and occupied Eastern Europe. The Typhus Commission's work did not go unrecognized. The development and mass deployment of typhus vaccine was later cited by military historians as one of the decisive factors in the Italian campaign. The Naples delousing operation became a landmark in public health history, the template for mass disease control that would influence emergency health responses for decades. Paul Muller received his Nobel Prize in 1948. Fred Soper went on to lead the Pan-American Sanitary Organization and used the techniques pioneered in Naples to help eradicate malaria and yellow fever across large parts of the Western Hemisphere. DDT itself had a complicated legacy. The same properties that made it so effective, its persistence, its ability to stay active in the environment, eventually made it a target of environmental concern. Rachel Carson's 1962 book documented the compound's devastating effects on bird populations and ecosystems, eventually leading to its ban in the United States in 1972 for agricultural use. But in the context of 1943 and 1944, the moral calculus was straightforward. DDT saved lives, measurably, demonstrably, in numbers that history makes clear. There is a version of World War II that most of us know. It's a story of tanks and planes, of D-Day beaches and Pacific Islands, of generals and politicians, and the grinding machinery of industrial warfare. It's a story told in steel and fire. But there is another war running underneath that story. A war fought with syringes and spray nozzles. A war waged by epidemiologists in laboratories and medical corpsmen in bombed-out Italian squares. A war against an enemy measured in microns, carried by creatures visible only under a magnifying glass. In that war, the Americans won decisively, and in doing so, they almost certainly changed the outcome of the visible war as well. Consider what might have happened without the vaccine, without the DDT, without the Commission's systematic protocols. A major typhus outbreak among Allied forces in Italy in early 1944 could have stalled the entire Italian campaign. It could have delayed the resources and logistics that fed into Operation Overlord. It could have changed the timeline of everything. History is rarely made by single causes, but the invisible war against typhus is a reminder that military power is not just about weapons. It is about whether your soldiers are alive and healthy enough to use them. The men who stormed the beaches of Normandy, who fought through the hedgerows of France, who crossed the Rhine, many of them survived not just because of their courage or their equipment. They survived because somewhere, in the years before, a scientist had discovered that DDT persisted on surfaces, because administrators had organized the vaccination of millions, because public health officers had dusted 1 million civilians in a broken city in southern Italy. They survived because someone understood that in war, as in everything, the enemy you cannot see is often the most dangerous one. And this time, America was ready.